I've gone back and forth 100 times on whether I should even post this, because where I'm from folks don't air their dirty laundry unless it's already caught fire, and even then you're expected to smile through it, and pretend you don't smell the smoke. But this thing's been sittin' in my chest so long it's either gotta come out, or it's gonna rot me from the inside. So here it is. I'm 38, born and raised in eastern Tennessee, the kind of place where summer sticks to your skin and everybody's mama knows your business before you've finished living it, and I always thought that kind of closeness kept bad things from sneaking up on you. Turns out it just makes the betrayal feel more personal. My wife, Lila, and I had been together almost 14 years by the time all this went sideways, married 10 of them, and we weren't one of those dramatic couples folks whisper about at church or the grocery store, because we didn't scream or throw plates or storm out of restaurants. We were quieter than that. The kind of quiet that creeps in when life piles up, bills stack higher than plans, and you start talking logistics more than dreams, and you don't even notice the romance packing its bags until it's already halfway down the road. I worked construction management, long hours, early mornings, always one problem away from a phone call that couldn't wait, and Lila had slowed down her own work over the years to keep things running at home, which she never complained about outright, but I could tell wore on her in ways she didn't know how to put into words. We loved each other, I don't doubt that, but love doesn't always mean attention, and attention is where the cracks start. Then Candace moved in. She and her husband bought the place straight across from us that spring, the white two-story with the wraparound porch and the hydrangeas out front, and right off the bat she stood out like she didn't quite belong to the same rhythm as the rest of the neighborhood. Always put together, always smilin', always seemin' like she had time for everybody. The very first week she knocked on our door with a blueberry pie cradled in her arms like it was a peace offering, and I remember thinking how rehearsed it all felt without quite knowing why. She stood there in the doorway talking about how she just loved meeting neighbors the old-fashioned way, how community mattered to her, how she believed folks were meant to look out for each other, and Lila just ate it up, her whole face lighting up like she'd been starving for exactly that kind of warmth. I stood there nodding, being polite, telling myself I was just tired and cynical, that not everybody had an angle. Candace had this way of listening that made you feel bigger than you were, eyes steady, head tilted just right, Logan soft like she was letting you in on something, and I noticed real quick how Lila leaned toward her when she talked, how her shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a while. At first I told myself it was good, healthy even, for Lila to have a friend so close, someone to walk with, someone to talk to, someone who wasn't exhausted all the damn time. They started taking evening walks together, just around the block, then longer loops, sometimes twice a day, and Candace would come over afterward, breathless and glowing, pouring herself water like our kitchen had always been hers. I'd be sitting at the table scrolling through emails, half listening to them talk about stuff I didn't really understand anymore, yoga classes, podcasts, books about finding yourself. And I'd feel like the odd man out in my own house without quite knowing how it happened. Lila started changing little things, wearing brighter colors, putting on perfume just to run errands, checking her reflection before she stepped outside, and I noticed, but I told myself people are allowed to change, that it didn't mean anything. Then came the late-night texts. Lila would be in bed beside me, screen lighting up her face, smiling to herself, and when I'd ask who it was she'd say Candace, just shooting the breeze, just girl talk, and roll away like that was explanation enough. I wanted to believe her, because the alternative felt too heavy to carry. Candace started inviting Lila over for wine on her porch, just the two of them, Logan late into the night, and sometimes I'd look out the window and see Candace leaning in close, hand on Lila's arm, saying something serious while Lila nodded like she was taking notes on her own life. What I didn't know then was that Candace wasn't just listening. She was learning. She learned where Lila felt unseen, where she felt underappreciated, where she felt like her life had shrunk smaller than the dreams she used to have, and she learned exactly how to frame herself as the person who understood all of it. And I let it happen, because I thought neighbors were just neighbors, because I trusted my wife, because I never imagined someone would come into our lives smiling like a friend and leave carry in my marriage with her. By the time I started feeling that tightness in my chest every time Candace's laugh drifted across the street, it was already too late to pretend this was just friendly southern hospitality. Something was shifting. And I didn't know yet that I was about to lose a whole lot more than my peace of mind. If Candace had come in loud, flashy, or obvious, I might have clocked it sooner, might have thrown up some kind of wall or at least asked the right questions, but that ain't how she worked, and that's the part that still messes with my head, because she didn't force her way into our lives, she eased herself in like she'd always been there. After a couple months, it stopped feeling like Candace was a neighbor and started feeling like she was a fixture, like the mailbox or the stop sign or the big oak tree at the end of the street, just part of the landscape whether you noticed her or not. She knew my schedule better than I did. She knew when I left for work, when I got home, when I was likely to be tired and irritable, and somehow she always showed up during those windows, usually with Lila already at her side, like they'd planned it without ever saying they planned it. She'd stop Lila on the sidewalk to check in, which turned into 40-minute conversations while I waited inside wondering if dinner was ever gonna happen, and when they finally came in, Lila would be lighter somehow, talking faster, moving like she just had coffee instead of a long walk. Candace never badmouthed me outright, not where I could hear it, but she didn't have to, because she asked questions that did the job for her. She'd say things like, "Doesn't it get lonely when he's always working?" Or, "Don't you ever miss feeling like somebody's really present with you?" And Lila would laugh it off at first, defend me even, but those questions didn't disappear after they were asked. They stuck. I could see it in the way Lila looked at me sometimes, like she was weighing something, like she was running a quiet comparison in her head she hadn't been making before. Candace started showing up when I wasn't home more often, dropping by with wine or snacks or some new self-care idea she wanted to share, and I only knew about it because Lila would mention it later, casual like it didn't matter, like it wasn't strange for another woman to be spending hours in my house while I was gone. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, didn't want to sound insecure or controlling, so I swallowed that uneasy feeling and told myself I was being dramatic, that this was just how women bonded, that I didn't understand because I wasn't built that way. Meanwhile, Candace's husband started disappearing from the picture. At first he was around, grilling in the driveway, nodding at me across the street, normal enough, but slowly he faded out, less porch sitting, less Logan, until one day I realized I hadn't seen him in weeks. Candace told Lila they were going through a phase. Said it in that breezy voice like it was temporary, manageable, nothing to worry about, and Lila took that as an invitation to be supportive, to listen, to empathize. That's when the emotional lines really started blurring. Lila would come to bed talking about Candace's marriage, about how sad it was, about how nobody should feel alone inside their own relationship, and I'd lie there next to her feeling like I was being described without my name being said. I tried to step up, tried to be more present, came home earlier when I could, suggested date nights, talked about trips we could take once work slowed down, but it felt like I was chasing something that had already shifted direction. Candace had become the place Lila went first with her thoughts, her doubts, her frustrations, and once that happens, you ain't the primary voice anymore. You're just another opinion she filters through someone else. One night sticks with me more than the rest. I came home early, house quiet, lights dim, and I could hear Candace and Lila talking in the living room, low voices, serious tones, not Logan like usual, and I stopped in the hallway without meaning to, just standing there listening like a coward. Candace was saying, "You know you deserve to feel chosen, right?" And Lila didn't answer right away, just sighed. And that sigh told me more than words ever could. I walked in then, made noise on purpose, and they both jumped like kids caught doing something they weren't supposed to, Candace smiling too fast, Lila too quiet. From that point on, Candace started treating me different. Still polite, still friendly, but sharper somehow, like she was measuring me, testing my patience, pushing just enough to see what I'd do. She'd make comments about how stressed I looked, how Lila worried about me, how maybe I worked too hard for a life that wasn't making either of us happy, and she said it all with a smile so sweet you'd feel crazy calling it out. And the worst part is, Lila started echoing her. Not word for word, not right away, but the themes were the same, the doubts sounded familiar, like I'd heard them somewhere else before. By then, Candace didn't feel like a neighbor anymore. She felt like a third presence in my marriage, sitting just outside the frame, whispering while I was busy trying to hold things together with hands already slipping. I still didn't know she was after my wife. I thought she was just lonely, just messy, just overly involved. But looking back now, I can see it clear as day. She wasn't rushing anything. She was studying us. And she already knew exactly where to apply pressure. Alright, so by the time all that mess from the first 2 parts settled into my bones, life had taken on this weird, stretched out feeling, like every day was humid and buzzing and just waiting to snap. Folks think the big pain hits you all at once, like a truck blowing through a red light. But nah, this was more like standing too close to a bonfire, inch by inch, until your skin starts blistering and you don't even notice when it happens. The neighbor, I'll call her Elle, kept sliding into our lives like she'd always been there, like she was some missing piece God forgot to add till now, and my wife, bless her heart, started acting like that was the most natural thing in the world. They'd sit on the porch together in the evenings, wine glasses clinking, laughing too loud at stuff that wasn't that funny, while I pretended to scroll my phone and not feel like a guest in my own damn marriage. It wasn't just the time they spent together, it was the way my wife started coming back different, like she'd swapped out parts of herself without telling me. She talked with her hands more, picked up little sayings that weren't hers, started listening to music she used to mock, and every time I asked about it she'd shrug and say something like, "People change," in that tone that means don't push this. Elle had this way of looking at her, real slow and focused, like she was studying a map nobody else could read, and I'd catch it out of the corner of my eye and feel something cold crawl up my spine. I told myself I was being paranoid, told myself I was just insecure, told myself all the dumb lies men tell when they're scared to name what's happening right in front of them. One night, after a long day that had already kicked my ass sideways, I came home to find my wife not there and her car gone, which wasn't unusual except she hadn't texted, hadn't called, hadn't left a note, and the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I sat on the couch, boots still on, staring at the dark TV screen, replaying every argument we'd had over the last few months, every time she'd sighed like I was a chore, every time she'd chosen Elle's company over mine without even pretending it was a hard choice. When she finally walked in, smelling like wine and that lemony candle Elle always burned, she looked surprised to see me awake, like she'd forgotten I existed past a certain hour. We argued, but not in a yelling way, more like 2 people poking at a wound with dirty fingers, saying things that didn't sound as bad as they felt. She said I was distant, that I didn't see her anymore, that Elle listened in a way I never did, and I remember laughing at that, a short, ugly sound, because I had been listening so hard it hurt, but somehow it never counted. I asked her straight up if there was something going on, and she got real still, real quiet, then said no, but her eyes slid away just enough to make the word taste like a lie. That was the first time I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling fan and wondering when exactly my life had gone off the rails without bothering to tell me. From there it got uglier, slower, more exhausting, like drowning in molasses. Elle started dropping by unannounced, bringing over food we didn't ask for, acting like the queen of concern, always asking my wife if she was okay, if she needed anything, if she wanted to come over and get a break. I'd watch my wife's shoulders relax when Elle walked in, watch her smile in a way that used to be reserved for me, and it felt like someone was quietly stealing furniture out of my house one piece at a time. I tried talking to friends. But how do you explain that you're losing your wife not to another man but to the woman next door who waters her lawn at dawn and waves like she's doing you a favor? The night it finally clicked wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no tears, just a moment so clear it hurt. I came home early, unheard, and saw them in the kitchen, standing too close, my wife's hand resting on Elle's arm like it belonged there, their heads bent together like they were sharing a secret that had nothing to do with me. They jumped apart when they noticed me, all awkward smiles and excuses, but the damage was done, the picture burned into my brain in high definition. I didn't say much, just nodded and went outside, sat on the steps, and stared at the dirt until it got dark, feeling like the dumbest man alive for not seeing what had been happening all along. That was when I realized Elle hadn't just wandered into our lives by accident, hadn't just been a friendly neighbor with too much free time, but someone who saw a crack and kept pushing until the whole damn wall came down. And my wife, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had let her, maybe even welcomed it, and there was no unringing that bell. By the time I went back inside, the house felt different, like it already belonged to someone else, and I knew deep down that whatever came next was going to be worse before it ever got better. After that night, things didn't blow up right away like you'd expect in movies or those fake-ass viral stories. Nah, it went the other way, quieter, heavier, like the air before a southern storm when the cicadas shut up and even the trees looked nervous. My wife started being careful, which somehow hurt worse than if she'd just gone full reckless, because careful means she knew exactly what she was doing and was trying not to get caught doing it. Elle backed off just enough to look innocent, stopped coming over unannounced, started waving from her yard again like nothing had changed, but I could feel her presence everywhere, like cigarette smoke stuck in curtains long after the smoker's gone. We lived like roommates pretending to be married, passing each other in hallways with polite nods, talking logistics instead of feelings, who's picking up groceries, who's paying which bill, all that boring adult stuff that becomes a shield when you don't want to touch the real problem. At night, I'd lie there listening to my wife breathe, wondering who she was texting under the covers, wondering if she was thinking about Elle's laugh or the way she touched her arm, or the freedom she probably felt just being seen in a way I apparently no longer managed to pull off. I hated myself for the jealousy, hated myself for wanting to snoop, hated myself for still wanting her at all when pride alone should have packed my bags. What messed with my head the most was how Elle started playing this long, patient game, like she had all the time in the world and knew she'd win eventually. She'd catch me alone and ask how I was holding up, voice all syrupy concern, telling me marriage was hard and people grow in different directions, like she was some damn therapist instead of the reason my home felt like a minefield. She never crossed a line outright, never said anything I could point to and go, there, that's it, that's the villain move, but everything she said felt calculated, like she was gently nudging me toward the edge while keeping her hands clean. My wife started staying out later, coming home with that buzz glow people get when they've been laughing too hard and forgetting responsibilities, and when I asked where she'd been she'd say she needed space, that she felt suffocated, that I was making things worse by questioning her. Funny thing is, I wasn't yelling, wasn't accusing anymore, I was tired, worn down, just asking like a man who already knows the answer and is hoping to be wrong. Every time she said Elle understood her, that Elle made her feel alive, it felt like being told my replacement had already been hired and I was just waiting on HR to make it official. There was this one afternoon, hot as hell, when I came home early again and saw my wife's car parked in Elle's driveway, and something inside me just cracked open. I sat in my truck with the engine off, sweat rolling down my back, watching the house like it might confess something if I stared hard enough. I imagined them inside, talking, laughing, maybe holding hands, maybe kissing, and instead of anger I felt this deep, hollow sadness, like I was already grieving something that wasn't technically dead yet. I didn't confront them, didn't storm in, just backed out and drove aimlessly for an hour, radio off, windows down, letting the noise of the road drown out my thoughts. When I finally got home that evening, my wife was there, acting normal, asking about my day like she hadn't been anywhere near Elle's place, and that's when I realized how far gone we were, because lying had become easier than honesty. I asked her straight up, no yelling, no sarcasm, just asked if she was in love with Elle, and she went quiet in that same way she had before, eyes glossy, jaw tight, like she was choosing words off a menu. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either, just said she was confused and needed time, and that answer felt like a slow knife, because confusion is just love that hasn't finished packing its bags yet. That night I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak like it was adjusting to my absence, and I thought about how Elle had done this without ever looking like the bad guy. No cheating scandals, no screaming matches, no broken noses, just patience and attention and a better understanding of what my wife wanted than I apparently had. And the worst part was knowing my wife wasn't some helpless victim, that she'd made choices every step of the way, choices that led her right out of our marriage and straight into the arms of the woman next door. By the time morning came, I knew the end was close enough I could almost hear it breathing, and all I could do was brace myself for whatever came next. I wish I could say it ended quiet and dignified, like two adults realizing the road forked and politely choosing different paths. But that ain't how things go down where I'm from, and it sure as hell wasn't how this story wrapped itself up. What actually happened was loud and ugly and messy enough that half the street still slows down when they drive past my place, probably wondering if tonight's the night something else explodes. The fuse got lit on a Thursday evening, hot as sin, cicadas screaming like they knew something was coming, when I pulled into the driveway earlier than usual because work had shut down for a busted water line. I hadn't even killed the engine yet when I saw Elle's car parked crooked halfway onto my lawn, like she'd rushed over without thinking twice. That alone was enough to make my jaw tighten, because she'd been real careful lately, always playing innocent, always waving like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. I walked inside and heard voices, low at first, then sharper, my wife's voice cracking in that way it does when she's past the point of pretending she's calm. I didn't announce myself, didn't stomp or cough or do any of that polite crap. I just kept walking until I was standing in the living room, watching my wife and Elle face off like they'd forgotten I existed at all. Elle was crying, but not the kind that comes from regret, it was the kind that comes from being called out, mascara streaked, hands fluttering, saying she never meant for it to go this far, saying love just happens, saying nobody can help who they fall for. My wife looked wrecked and furious all at once, like someone who finally realized the house had been on fire for a while, and she'd just been smelling smoke. Then Elle saw me. Everything shifted right then, like the air got sucked out of the room, and she straightened up, wiped her face, and had the nerve to say my name like she was relieved to see me, like I was about to be her backup plan or her shield or something. That's when something in me snapped clean in half. I didn't yell at first, which I think scared them both more than if I had, because I asked real calm why her car was on my damn lawn and why she thought it was okay to come into my house and finish tearing apart what she'd already been working on for months. She tried to talk over me, tried to explain, tried to spin it into something gentle and misunderstood, but I cut her off and told her to shut up, that she'd said enough lies to last a lifetime. That's when my wife finally turned on her too, really turned, screaming about all the late-night talks, all the "just checking on you" texts, all the times Elle had listened and nodded and validated every little doubt instead of ever once saying maybe this is something you should work out with your husband. The truth came spilling out fast and mean, accusations flying, secrets dropping like broken glass, and I stood there realizing this wasn't some sudden betrayal, it was a long damn con. Neighbors started showing up outside when the shouting got louder, and I didn't even care, because Elle finally dropped the act and fired back, saying my wife had been unhappy long before she ever came into the picture, saying she just helped her see what she deserved, saying if it hadn't been her it would have been someone else. That was the moment I saw her for exactly what she was, not some romantic rebel, not some misunderstood soul, just a person who liked winning and didn't care who got wrecked along the way. I told her to get out, not tomorrow, not after one more conversation, but right then, and when she hesitated I grabbed her keys off the counter and threw them out the front door so hard they bounced off the porch railing and skidded into the yard. She went after them cussing me out, and my wife collapsed into a chair like the strings had been cut, hands over her face, sobbing like everything finally hit at once. The real scandal came after that, because word travels fast in a place like this, and by the next day people were picking sides, whispers rolling through church, through the grocery store, through every backyard fence. Elle tried to paint herself as the brave one who followed her heart, my wife tried to hide and figure out what the hell she'd just done, and I was left standing in the wreckage answering questions I never asked for. My wife moved out 2 weeks later, not to Elle's place like everyone expected, but that didn't really matter anymore, because the damage was done, lines were drawn, and whatever we had before was gone for good. I didn't chase her, didn't beg, didn't make a speech, because something in me had burned clean away during that blow-up, and I knew deep down that even if she came back, it would never be the same shape. Elle sold her house a few months after that, real sudden, for sale sign popping up overnight, probably realizing being the villain hits different when folks stop smiling at you in public. I watched the moving truck pull away and felt nothing but tired, like a storm finally passing and leaving you to count what's broken. So yeah, that's how it ended, not with closure or peace or some moral victory, just a loud, public unraveling that showed me exactly who everyone was when the mask slipped. I'm still here, still figuring out how to rebuild a life that got hijacked by someone who didn't belong in it to begin with. And I gotta ask, because this is eating at me more than I like to admit, if the person who wrecked your marriage walks away bruised but standing, and the person you loved walks away changed forever, who do you forgive first, them, yourself, or nobody at all?